Do you have difficulty calming your racing mind at night? Do you lay awake at night, unable to tame your thoughts so you can sleep? Or do the stresses of life tempt you to fall into that trap of second guessing yourself or others? Then you'll be glad you tuned into today's episode because we're going to be talking about how to find mental rest. Welcome back to your hope filled perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God given identity. But in order to fulfill the calling that God has on our life, we have to take time to rest. And that includes mental rest. So today we're going to be talking about how to find mental rest. But before we get started with this episode, I just want to remind you of a passage that comes out of Isaiah 30. It says, "This is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel, says. Only in returning to me and resting in me will you be saved. In quietness and confidence is your strength." But you would have none of it. You said, "No, we will get our help from Egypt. They will give us swift horses for riding into battle." But the only swiftness you are going to see is the swiftness of your enemies chasing you. So the Lord must wait for you to come to him so he can show you his love and compassion. For the Lord is a faithful God, and blessed are those who will wait for his help. Joining me on the conversation today is my friend Alicia Michelle. You're probably familiar with her because I have been on her podcast and have shared her episodes with you. But she's a certified mindset coach, speaker, Bible study author, and award-winning podcast host of the top-ranked The Christian Mindset Coach podcast. And through her coaching and her courses, and by the power of the Holy Spirit, she equips Christian women with practical, biblically based tools to break free from worry and exhaustion of perfectionism, people pleasing, and performance that comes from feeling never enough. I am so glad you're with us today, Alicia. Welcome to
Oh
the
my gosh. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on today. And I think this is a very timely and important conversation. So thanks for inviting me to be part of it.
I'm thrilled that we're having this conversation. You know what I have found through years in private practice, as well as having this podcast for 5 years now, is I've realized that so often our ministry, our passion, our books come out of our own hurts and trials and needs. So I would be curious how this has been true for you as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think God's somehow in his divine wisdom made it so that we would be more able to speak to others because we have sat in that place of pain, that place of suffering. We don't enjoy going through those places, but he often turns those into our callings. And I have seen that in almost everything that I do online. It feels like comes from, as I'm sure for you too, it comes from a period that I've walked through or a question I've had of God, and he's allowed me to understand deeper, or people that I've worked with and seen how he's worked through them in that area. So absolutely, it is definitely a big part of our ministry. We don't enjoy doing that, but it is how he works and it's how we relate to each other.
Yeah, and I've found that most of the time, these are not the callings we would have chosen for
No,
ourselves.
no, no, absolutely not. No, no. In
Just
fact,
being honest.
yeah, there's a dear friend of mine. I happened to talk to her this morning, but another friend who works online. And she and I have often said, like, why did God call us to talk about these really hard things? Can't we just like go have a cupcake factory somewhere? Literally, like, can't we just go have a store and make cupcakes all day and sell them? I mean, I'm sure there's issues with that, but still, like, oh, why this, Lord? Why these hard issues? But
I know.
it's
You
what
and
the
I have
calling
talked
is.
on your podcast about me having gone through depression and
Yeah.
anxiety
Yeah.
and chronic pain. And
Yeah.
I just keep telling my publishers, I just want to write a book about chocolate
Yeah, exactly.
lighthouses of Michigan. And they're like, yeah, no, there's not a need for that.
Yeah. There's no sales and those kinds of things. But yeah, we're glad to do the Lord's work, right? But it's just
That's
like some
right.
days like, oh,
So
yeah.
as you work with other women,
Mhm.
where do you think that the performance mentality, perfectionism, and the people pleasing originates? Because I
Yeah.
think most of our listeners can relate to at least one of those.
Right. I found that there is a underlying what I refer to as a core soundtrack of something that has been answered from some basic questions around identity that our brain answers for all of us, that's in late childhood, early teen years. And those three questions are, am I enough? Am I loved? And am I worthy? And whether we actively or passively are answering those questions, our brain is figuring out what is it going to take for me to be enough, to be worthy, to be loved. And in those years, we often can see, well, okay, if I work really hard in school and get good grades, then I'm enough. If I look really pretty for a guy, then I'm enough. And without even realizing it, we can develop these soundtracks that, even though we know the truth of God, are in opposition to those things and put us into these patterns where we find ourselves making other people happy, pleasing them. There are certain people, just thinking in my own life, that because of the patterning that has happened over the years, I responded a certain way, and usually as a people pleaser. But even now, even though I've had great healing in those areas by the Holy Spirit, there can still be situations where it just triggers that for me. I had that happen over the holidays where it's just like that person, I was with that person, and it's just like instantly triggered that for me. And the difference now is that I can notice it and I can say, okay, look what's happening here, Lord. But those patterns, they run deep, and we can have healing around them. Absolutely. I think part of that healing includes being aware of when it comes up again,
Yes.
and really understanding, Lord, what is it that needs to be that next level of healing in this area?
I would love for you to share with our listeners when you dealt with that performance mentality and the people pleasing and the
Yeah.
perfectionism. Did that take a physical toll? Did that take a mental toll? Did that take an emotional toll on your life?
Oh, absolutely. That was kind of the impetus to the specific work that I'm doing with women right now. I didn't realize it was taking such a physical toll on me. The idea of needing to perform, needing to be perfect, needing to be in control of everything. I didn't realize how it was affecting me until 2017, when I had a huge medical crisis happen out of nowhere. And it was one of those life-threatening kind of things that happened, and the doctors had no explanation for it. They didn't understand. Well, I don't understand why you're having it was a vertebral artery dissection. I had two of them in a week. And this is the kind of injury that happens for people who are in accidents and have whiplash. I mean, it's a severe injury to the neck. And the doctors were like, are you sure, you don't do bungee jumping and all these things? But really what had happened was, it was years of pushing and not listening to my body, of not sleeping. I slept 4 hours a night for about 15 years straight. That's just what I did,
Yeah.
because I had such a driving force. And yeah, people had said, oh, you're working too hard. Oh, you're doing too much, all these things. But it was, I would do these little quick fixes, and it just, like, I kept going right back. Well, after all of that happened, and I had to spend 9 months in bed, not able to move, everything in my life canceled, basically. Somebody else taking care of my kids. I was homeschooling at the time. My husband was out of work, so he was doing homeschooling. Like, all of these, just, it was insane. It was an insane period, but it was also a time when God really, like you had shared in that original verse, the Isaiah 30 verse, just being quiet, being still. And he had to get my attention. He had to do all of that in my life to get my attention, that there are deeper things under here that you need to address. And for me, it was those deeper core soundtracks about what I had believed about myself, about what I needed to do in order to be enough, to be right, to be a good daughter, a good wife, a good mom, all of those things. And it took him having to make me stop and go through all of that to really understand, and to help women in the future understand that it's not just about hacks, it's about getting to the root of what's there, and
Okay.
then letting him share and change and do that work inside of us. So yeah, physically, that was a huge thing. And I still have, I haven't had one for a long time, but when I do have certain headaches or things in my body that I recognize as affiliated with that period, it's almost like a little alarm clock. So I
Mhm.
don't like when they happen, but I know that that's God's way of kind of going, hello, are you paying attention? We're not going back there, right? Because he specifically had said, this is your second chance. There will not be a third. So you need to pay attention. It was like, I'm paying attention. I hear you, Lord.
Yep. I'm right there with you.
Yeah,
Right there with you. But I think the part of that passage that I read that saddens me because I can relate to it is the part that says, but you would have none of it.
exactly. Yep.
And
No,
it's not that you were doing bad things or I was
no.
doing bad things. I mean, we can get so intent in ministry.
Right.
And we know
Right.
our time is short. We want to bring people into the kingdom. We want to point them to the true source of encouragement and hope.
Right.
But when we do that to the neglect of our own body, that's when God's like, no, 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 I didn't ask you to do that. Even Jesus went away to rest.
Right. Yeah. And that's the frustrating part is we are in such a hurry, rush society that we just want the hurry, quick fix answer. I was in a coaching call this morning and my group coaching program, one of them that I do, and one of the ladies was saying how she had noticed that the enemy is always trying to rush us into a decision, rush us into an answer, and that God's patient and He waits.
Yeah.
He gives us space to hear, to listen. And I was thinking about how, because of how our culture is set up, and because we're not taught to stop and to listen and to make space for God to show up. We're just like, okay, God, I got 5 minutes. Ready? Let's go. Tell me why I need to know. Like that's our attitude with some of this stuff. And so we think, well, God has nothing to say. Okay, well, then I'm just going to go do this, and He wants us to be still and to wait for Him, that He's right there offering the rest. But it comes down to obedience. Are we going to be still enough and respectful enough of what He needs to do and understand that it's we're going to have to stop. We're going to have to change something and be still for Him to work and for Him to show up. Are we going to do that? Like He's offering it, but are we going to do it?
It's actually a two-part. I think you're right. I think it does come down to obedience,
Mm-hmm.
but underscoring that obedience is it really comes down to do we trust Him?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how
And
would you define mental rest?
I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. Mental rest in everyday, meaning how we look at the thoughts that are continually going through our heads. And then there's extended periods of mental rest where we're clearing space
Mhm.
and making room for God. I think both are important, having periods of times that are just open for God to speak and having regular disciplines where we're controlling and managing what's in our heads and we're putting up shutting doors, so to speak, in our mind of when certain things keep running and going crazy, doing what we need to do to manage what's in there. So I think there's two aspects of it.
We're talking about how to find mental rest. As some of you know, I'm embarking on a sabbatical period, and I wanted to have this conversation because it's one thing to take a physical rest, but then it's a totally another thing to let your mind be at rest. We're talking about our need for that daily mental rest, but also that purposeful extended rest. Any tips about how we can put both of those into regular practice so that our listeners don't get to the place that you got and that I've been?
Definitely. Yeah. So, starting with daily rest, I think it's a really important idea to think about that we have regular habits in place to not only acknowledge what's going on inside, but to know what to do with what's happening inside of us. There are some simple things like there's a practice called morning pages, which is from Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, I think is the name of the book. It's not a Christian book, but in this book, she talks about how just having the practice of taking a journal and writing 3 pages every day of just what's on your head and what's in your heart. And I have found this to be hugely beneficial in my life. And for a lot of the clients that I work with, they find that as well, that when they're just getting the thoughts out, you don't have to have some great prose and come up with some beautiful concepts, or it doesn't have to be all this pressure. It's just, there are times, especially when there is so much chaos and noise in our head, that we need to just get rid of all of it and put it out there so we can kind of begin to see it. It's when we do that, we're moving it from just the subconscious bouncing around in our head through the logical parts of our brain, writing it down on paper, seeing it. We're seeing it from different angles. And then we can begin to work through it logically and begin to apply God's truth to it and manage it a little bit more than just kind of the in our head. So that is something that I employ often as a regular practice, just when I feel that kind of tension rising up inside me. So that's something that we can do every day. But we first, and even in order to know that that's happening, we have to be able to notice.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems really kind of an obvious thing to say, but so many of us just, we find ourselves in habits or activities where we don't understand why, oh, I'm craving, if we've used food as a coping mechanism, oh, I'm craving this, or oh, I want to go have this, or I want to go do that. Why am I craving that? What's going on inside of me? What am I feeling? There's nothing wrong with having a desire for the relief, but what is causing that desire? And checking in with ourselves, asking the Holy Spirit to help identify what that is that we're feeling and experiencing, and asking for his help in managing it in a different way. I think, like I said, doing that laying it all out through something like morning pages is very powerful. But in times when we notice there's a lot happening and we really just need a break, taking an extended rest can be huge in terms of our mental health. What that looks like for me, I think it can look different for every person, but for me, that is making space for quiet and for solitude. And that for me is when I hear from God. That's when I can stop all of the crazy around me and hear from God. And we can talk about that as a theoretical concept, but when we can, as I know you are doing, set time on the calendar to say, this is what God has said needs to happen, or we're taking time on a Sunday every week, or whatever day, or a couple of hours a certain day. When we set up those boundaries, it makes a difference beyond than just talking about it. So we have to set that boundary first, as this is what God's calling me to do in this season. It's more than just a daily kind of checking in and seeing what's there. It's something I have to really invest in. This is something I really need to hear and let God help me with. And as part of that, and as part of the daily discipline too, there are times when we just have so much in there that we can let ourselves fall down these paths of just worry and fear and all kinds of stuff. Noticing again is a big part of that. Noticing why it's there, acknowledging why it's there, and beginning to welcome in scriptural truth to help us understand and to find a different perspective. But catching ourselves before we kind of get down all these paths is huge. I don't know if you found yourself, I'm sure you have, like found some huge long spiral. And if we can learn to catch it more at the beginning, it can help us not feel like we're all the way down at the end of the spiral, at the
Well,
end
I
of it.
think that's why it's so important to make this a daily
Yeah,
practice,
right.
because the longer we wait to take
Yes.
time to do this, the harder it is to catch ourselves when we are
Mm,
in that downward spiral. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges for so many people is this is a foreign concept. They're used to pushing, they're used to that cultural mentality that if it's going to be, it's up to me. But then
yeah.
when you get to the point where you are either forced to stop
Mhm.
or you choose to stop, you still have that habitual seeking for that adrenaline, that hit
Yes,
of scrolling through social media and seeing the
exactly.
impressions or checking the
Yeah.
email or marking things off your to-do list. I have
Yeah.
been known to write things on my to-do list that I've already done just so I have the satisfaction of writing
Yeah.
it off. Like, how
Yeah.
twisted is that?
No, I get it though.
But
We
it
we've
goes to that I'm being productive. I'm
yeah.
accomplishing something.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think there's space for changing the definition of productive
Mhm.
because rest is productive.
Mhm.
And when we
Yes.
don't take time to rest, it is actually counterproductive. Our
Mm.
brain needs that time to
Mhm.
regenerate those naturally occurring neurotransmitters that help us in so many areas of our life. But if we don't
Mm.
take time to rest, then we end up in a deficit. And then we get to a point like you were and where I have been, where we don't have a choice. Now it's
Exactly.
life or death, and we have to choose life. But in
Yeah.
order to do that, we have to first choose rest. So,
Mm.
what would you say are some of the other biggest obstacles to allowing ourselves to actually enter into that mental rest?
Mm. Before I answer that question, can I share something that just kind of
Sure.
came to me as you were talking?
Yeah.
Um, I was thinking about how Jesus, of course, is the perfect model for all things in our lives, and how he was a perfect example of balance, and how his calling was, he lived to be 33 years old, but how his ministry calling publicly was 3 years. And
Yeah.
even in that 3 years, he did not stop to serve and help every single person that he talked to.
Yeah.
There were times when he turned away from the crowds, that he went to the mountains with by himself or with his inner circle, so to speak. He decided and knew his limits. He made an active choice to do that. And you and I had said at the beginning of the call, like, we don't want to leave anything on the table in terms of
Right.
ministry or helping with the talents that God's given us. I mean, it could be argued from an outwardly worldly standpoint. Yo, Jesus, you left some stuff on the table when you didn't heal everybody and take care of everybody. But did he?
Right.
I mean, he would have perfectly shown up, however, because he's perfect. But you're like, he knew his limits and he knew that he needed to stop. And that was part of showing up and being the best version and being the fullest part of his ministry. And
I
we
think
don't
that
quite get that, you know?
he also sought out his father's
Mm-hmm.
instruction of
Mm-hmm.
what to do when.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have a tendency to get on this hamster wheel thinking, well, I'm doing and I'm pleasing God. And the more I do,
Yeah,
when in
exactly.
actuality, he's like, I didn't really ask you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
kind of carried that burden by yourself.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, you and I talked about this on your podcast, is that Jesus did know the limits of his ministry and how long it would last. And yet we never saw him running anywhere.
Yeah. No, he was never in a hurry.
No.
He was never rushed. And he didn't let other people rush him. He listened perfectly to God and his timing. And anyway, I just think that is interesting. So you were talking about what are some obstacles that keep us from doing that, would you
No.
say?
Entering into mental rest.
I think some of them have kind of come up that we've talked about. The idea of, I need to show myself that I can be worthy by doing some of these things. I need to, I want to outwardly have an example that I'm doing God's work. I want to have a physical, like you said, checking off the to-do list, even though you've already done it, those kinds of things. Like, I think we have that pressure from, maybe from others, but more, at least for me, more from inside of ourselves, that if I'm doing, then I'm good with God. And it's more vulnerable to be in a place where you are loved and accepted and good, so to speak. Like you're good. You're even with God, so to speak, in terms of his love for you. Right where we are at without doing anything. When we're in a society where it's like, well, you need to show up and you need to do the work. It's really hard for us as hardworking, dedicated people who want to serve God to get that fully. And there are times when we just need to sit in that and let it minister to us. That's really hard to do. It's almost it's not, I don't know if it, would you think it's, do you think it's a pride thing? What do you think?
I think part of it is pride, and
Yeah.
part of it is that constant temptation, even in ministry, to always be comparing ourselves to what
Mm-hmm.
everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
Whether it's they're producing more courses or they're writing more books or they have more speaking engagements or they're bringing more followers to Christ. And
Yeah.
the enemy twists that.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, I think if we could take on the mindset that we're going to celebrate our brothers and sisters' successes, if you will, I don't really like
Right.
that term, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
If we could celebrate what they're doing instead of allowing the enemy to come in and use that as a temptation to compare and
Mm-hmm.
people our striving, as if we're not doing the same thing, we're not as good, we're not as worthy,
Mm-hmm.
God's not going to be as pleased, when in actuality God has each of us in our own lane. We're the ones who try to skip over into someone else's lane, and God's like,
Yeah.
it's not really the plan I had for you,
Right.
but I'll wait for you to come back to the plan I have for you.
Yeah. And it's those extended periods of rest where we realize how much we have been depending on what we're doing to help ourselves feel good about ourselves, I think. Because we realize when all that is taken away, well, what's left? It's almost like we feel naked. We're like, who am I? What am I if I'm not doing these things? There even is, like you said, that physical hit of the endorphins of, oh, I finished that. Oh, I did that. Checked that box off. And
Oh,
for
people
me,
like that post, or I've got this many downloads on this
yeah,
episode. I mean, there
yeah,
is no shortage of
no,
dopamine hits around us for our accomplishments.
yes, yes. And when we stop that, it's can be a little, in fact, very unnerving. The times when I've just even like taken a couple of weeks off from work, it's always like this first 3, 4 days where I am just a little off because I feel like everything is you recognize how much of that, like that confidence, that balance was really coming from that feeling of I'm accomplishing these things, and God has to resettle my heart every time and tell me, almost like a detox, we're taking these things away, and I want to remind you again, yes, I'm glad that you're serving and doing the things that I've called you to do, but that at the end of the day, I am yours, you are mine, and that's it. You don't have to do anything for you to feel the things like this. And it's a really great reminder. It can be kind of scary when you're used to having your foot down on the gas pedal all the way, all the time, to learn that new way. But that's his way, and that's
So
the way we're going to have an eternity. You know?
I know. And it'll be a place of serving from joy
Right.
without the
Right.
striving.
Hmm.
We will be infused with that permanent dopamine hit because we will be in his presence. So I would be curious when you have done this before, whether it's
Yeah.
you've taken a 2 week vacation or you've just taken a 2 week sabbatical. When I have started, those first few days, like you mentioned, they're almost painful.
They are.
Like, what am I supposed to do with myself?
Yes.
And I'm not joking. Like
No, I'm laughing because that's exactly what it feels like. It
it,
feels like
it,
you just would
it's
rather just go
torture.
back to what you're doing, and it's like a detox. It really is.
And you know that's not what he wants you to do.
No.
And so I'm in this place of starting this sabbatical, and I'm like, like, will you give me some guardrails?
Yeah. Yeah.
What am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? What's going to be
Yeah.
pleasing to you? What's not pleasing to you?
Mhm.
What's going to cause pain? What's not going to cause pain? It's torture
Mhm.
until
It
you can
is.
get through it, like you said, like it is like a detox until you can get through that withdrawal period.
Right.
But
Right.
so I would be curious to hear from you. What has
Mm.
helped you move
Mm.
from that state of doing, being, pleasing to get through those difficult withdrawal days?
Yeah.
You can get to the point where you can finally breathe deep and rest.
Mm.
I'm open to any suggestions you have.
No, I agree. I think it's first of all, I would say that it happens every time for me. I am less surprised by it when it happens now. Before, when it would happen, I'd be like, wait, whoa, 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 whoa. My whole center's off here, you know. But now when it happens, I kind of see it and I feel it. And I don't, first, I'm like, why am I feeling like this? And it's like, okay, yes, this is what's happening. I start in the place of just being honest with God about what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like I usually feel very restless. Like I kind of don't like a dog who's just trying to find a place to sit and they can't find a place to sit. That's kind of how I feel. And it's very uncomfortable. So I try to put up specific boundaries. I try to ease my way into it. Sometimes I'm able to do it just like cold turkey and stop, but sometimes I'm having to be like, okay, well then you can look at email or whatever the thing is that would help me kind of transition for a little bit, but it's not the full amount or whatever it is. And then I also implement the things that I know bring rest to my soul and bring rest to my spirit and allow me to commune with God. So I do those with more intention and with more guardrails around them. So whether that is being in nature, that is, of course, spending time in the word.
Mhm.
Journaling is huge. I like to paint and to draw. And so that's a big thing for me. Being creative is a big, big, big way for me to reach God, listening to worship music,
Mhm.
different things that allow me to connect with the spirit in different ways. And then I give myself, like, I remember the last time I did this, I give myself certain permissions to do. Like for me, being spontaneous is something that's something I try to do in these times, because I do have a strict schedule with, helping my kids and all the things with work and stuff. So the idea of being able to say, here's the whole open day. I'm just going to let the Lord kind of guide me through what could be today. I give myself permission to do that instead of trying to schedule it all out. Maybe I have an idea of, I love to explore locally in our town. I live in San Diego, and there's lots of little beach towns or places to go visit. And so maybe I'll say, well, I'm just going to go down to, let's say, La Jolla. I'm just going to go down there. I don't know exactly where I'm going to end up. I'm going to bring my drawing sketchbook, and maybe I'll have lunch down there. Maybe I'll walk on the beach. Maybe I'll go shopping. I don't know. I just give myself permission for God to lead me. And the whole time I'm by myself and I'm letting God speak to me. But for me, the permission to have space to
Mm.
let him move is a big part of it. So and just having the mindset of, I can't make this happen. Like, I can't make the rest happen. I can set myself up for the place to receive it as best as I humanly can, but I cannot make his rest come into my heart. He's got
I
to do that.
That's a really important point.
We want to. We're like again, like he's this
Being
little
in
puppet on a
control.
string. Oh,
Yeah.
just do this and this and this. And this is the 5 steps to do that. And it's like, this is the living God of the universe. What makes you think that you can just set up this whole thing and he's going to show up and do what you want him to do? And he always surprises me in how it happens and the ways that it happens. But it's clear when he shows up, and it's like, there it is. There's the Lord. There it is. I know it. Right. So I've found that, as hard as it is, I set myself up for those ways that I know that I can commune with him, put up the guardrails to keep those things out. And then I wait for him. Like the verse says, I wait and trust and know that it's coming in his way and his time.
So, as you've become more accustomed to tuning into when you need to take these periods of rest, whether they're daily or they're that extended, what have you noticed in terms of your people pleasing, perfectionism, workaholic tendencies? Has there been a change in those
Yeah.
areas?
Mm, yes. And in fact, those are usually, when I sense those kind of creeping up on me again, those are usually a sign to me that it's time
Mm.
for a time like this.
Yeah.
And I notice that when I've come out of these seasons of putting the guardrails up, letting the Lord give me that mental rest, I come out so much more confident in the core essentials of who I am. I come out bold and unafraid to do what God's will is for me. I just come out like, come what may, say what you want to say about me, whatever that is. And I feel so much more empowered by the Lord to do exactly what he has for me and to not let other people or other things get in the way of that. So almost like I feel more, in some ways, kind of childlike. I feel more pure and boiled down to the essence of who I am as a person without all the baggage of the other things that can kind of creep in.
It's almost like the mentality of say what you want, but you're going to say it to my dad.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it kind of all falls away
Yeah.
and goes off.
We've been having a great conversation today about how to find mental rest. And I'd be curious, I'd love for you to leave some comments after this episode about what you put into practice so that you find mental rest. It's different from physically resting your body because we can be physically at rest and our mind can still be going 1,000 miles an
Oh
hour.
yeah. Yeah.
So, Alicia, I'd be curious if a listener's listening in and going, wow, I never really thought about that. What is something that they could begin to do today to recover that part of their life?
Well, I would say it starts with understanding how God made you and what lights you up. To me, being alone and left alone, like I was just telling my husband last night, I took a bath last night and I just sat there with a book and I was in there for like 2 hours. And in fact, he finally comes in and he peeks his head in and I'm like, can I just sleep in here tonight? Like I was just so content and rested, and it had been kind of a stressful day. That lights me up to just be by myself sometimes and to just read a book. So finding things that you maybe it's an experiment. You're not, because I it takes time to figure out these things about yourself, but just being curious, like what could be something that would be restful and also an avenue for the Lord to speak and to show up. For me, creativity is a big part of that. Being in nature is a big part of that. It's harder for me to do that that rest when there are other people around, because I think I'm distracted by other people and their needs and wanting to talk to them and all the things. So, like I said, for me, I think it really does start with the quiet and the solitude, but learning what makes you happy is, and how, in terms of how God wired you to connect with him, would be the first thing. And if you don't know, you can kind of start experimenting and see what that could be for you.
And ask, you know,
Yes.
that's what he's
Yes.
wanting you to
Yeah.
do. And
Yeah.
he's confirmed that in his word.
Right.
We found that out today.
Yeah.
If you ask, he's going to show you. But I
Exactly.
think the key is being patient and not
Mm.
expecting him to show you in the way and the time that you expect. At least
Oh no,
that's what
absolutely.
I'm dealing
Yeah.
with. It's like, Lord, could you just
Yeah.
give me a few details? And I really feel, I'm not being cheeky. I really feel like he's saying, that's on a need to know basis.
Exactly. No,
Like,
he does that. He
why
does.
I don't need to know yet. Okay. But I want to know. That's how I'm geared. And he's like, no, that's part of this rest is you don't really need to worry about that yet.
Exactly. No, I so understand that. It's so frustrating. But again, that is why he is not our God in a pocket. That is why he's not our rabbit foot that we rub when we need some little lucky charm in our life.
Yeah.
He's the living God of the universe who speaks to us and gives us what we need. Because I mean, that's a question I have for God when we get to heaven. Like, why don't you reveal, or why didn't you reveal all of those things, like this? Like, why didn't you not tell Michelle that? But there is a reason for it. Like, maybe we would try to create that. Maybe we would try to build it on our own or something. Whereas he's like, again, show up, let me be God.
Yeah.
Let me be the king. Let me show you that I really am your sustenance, even though you think all these other things, or you've seen how these other things are part of your life and are filling you up. Your true sustenance is in me. Let me provide it for you, because you can't make up that sustenance. I have to give it to you,
Right.
right? I have to give it to you, like the manna in the desert. They could not make that manna every morning. They had to wait every morning for it to come and for God to deliver it.
Yeah.
And we have to wait for him too.
And I sensed as I was asking him, I'm asking because I truly want to be obedient.
Yes.
I want to take this rest. I know he's called me to it, and I want to be obedient. And so I want to do it right. And, I
Yes.
sense him going,
Yes.
honey, it's not about that. And I'm going to show you a different way. So I had to go, okay, we're going to do this your way. It's the best
So
way. A
true.
little uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but I trust.
Yes.
So if a
Yes.
listener is resonating with our conversation today and they're realizing, wow, I need that. What they're talking about, yeah, that's missing. What hope-filled perspective would you want to leave them with today?
I would say do it. Just take that time to, maybe you're not ready to set aside 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months, whatever, but don't don't be afraid to move it from a theoretical concept to a reality in your life. I really think that that was something I wish I would had been able to bring into my life way back in the beginning of my marriage when I was a young mom. I understand that my demands were different. And maybe listening might think, well, there's just no way I can go on a sabbatical for 3 months or something. Like, I want you to see how you can begin to implement just even little bits of this in your life. What could that look like? It could be 15 minutes, it could be an hour, it could be a day, a week. It's hard to know where you're at, but you can get alone with the Lord and ask him, Lord, what is it that could help me begin to understand what this looks like, and give me a glimpse of how to make this happen. We've talked about some ideas today, but it's like we said, it is so unique for each one of us. And it's not about us orchestrating the circumstances to and doing it. It's about us creating the environment and him bringing the rest. So I would say, again, like so many of us hear these concepts and we think, oh, that's nice. And then we move on. If it's resonating, ask the Lord to help you figure out what that could look like, even right now, even in a small amount if it needs to be, and to just make it happen.
And that can be as small as 10 or 15 minutes at the
Yeah.
end of the day or at the
Yeah.
start of the day. And I think, Alicia, you would agree with me. Friends, I'm sure that there are some of you who are thinking, oh, there's no way I could do that. I can't take a week or 2 weeks off. And Alicia and I would both say, if God is beckoning you to do that,
Yeah.
You can't afford not to, or
Mhm.
you may get to that place physically
Yeah.
where you are flattened and don't have a
Amen.
choice.
Yep.
So if God's asking you to get away with him for a
Yeah.
space of mental rest, whether it's 10 minutes a day, 1 day a week on the Sabbath, or something more extended, please hear us.
Mm.
It's worth being obedient.
It is. And I think we're sometimes afraid, whether we want to admit it or not, we're afraid to be alone with God because it can be very scary. When we're alone with God, we're alone with our vulnerabilities. We're alone with the failures we think we've had, or maybe we really have had. And we think, okay, I don't know if I really want, I mean, like you said, in some ways it's not easy or simple to do that. It's like
Oh,
I would much rather just keep going and stay in my little craziness than be alone and just be still and to see all those things. That's a higher, harder road, but that's the road where you meet God.
yes.
That's where he shows up. And some of us are looking for a deeper relationship with God. It's not going to necessarily come. Maybe that next step for you is beyond just going to a Bible study and going to church. Maybe the next step is, you know what, taking this time alone with the Lord to let him speak to you and be uncomfortable in those areas that he's bringing out. Maybe that is the next thing for you.
And it's worth that uncomfortableness to
Yeah.
get that deeper
Right.
perspective, that deeper
Right.
walk, the lessons that he has for you.
Yeah.
When I've had to do this before, when I have physically been forced to take the time off, I was kicking and screaming. And
Yeah.
I can tell you by the end of that time period, I didn't want to go back to doing what I was doing
Yeah.
before because I gained so much in my cocooning time with God that I didn't want it to end. So it can be
Yes.
a little frightening, but recognize where the source of that fear is coming from because
Exactly.
God is beckoning you not to punish you,
Mm.
but because he loves you.
Amen.
I want to
Absolutely.
close out this episode just reminding you of Psalm 94, verse 19, that says, "When doubts filled my mind, your comfort gave me renewed hope and cheer." So if you're doubting whether or not this is something that God wants you to do, take it to him. But it's in that spending time with him that you receive that comfort, that you are encouraged, that your hope is restored, and then you can be more effective in his call for your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Friends, I want to encourage you to check out Alicia Michelle's podcast. I'm going to put the information in our show notes, but you can go back and listen to some of her previous episodes. And I think that you will find that you will be encouraged because she and I are very consistent in our messages about knowing our true identity in Christ
Yeah.
and recognizing the importance of our thoughts and our words. So I'll put all the information about her and her ministry in the show notes. And you can find the show notes at drmichelleb.com. If there was something in today's episode that encouraged you, maybe it challenged you a little bit, would you leave us a comment and let us know? And would you consider sharing this episode with a friend? Because sometimes when we share with a friend, we create that accountability. And accountability is really important in helping us to do what we know we've been called to do, but might otherwise be too afraid to do. Alicia, thank you so much for spending this time with us. Friends, I hope that something in today's episode encouraged you, and I look forward to chatting with you again next week. But until then, it's my prayer for you that you have a hope-filled week.